I don't know if you guys have noticed, but it seems like everyone and their mother is doing low buy or no buy this year, from content creators I've only seen online to people I know in real life. I've seen so many friends and acquaintances posting about their decision to do low buy or no buy, and while I'm thrilled to see so many people taking on these challenges to improve their spending habits, I will not be joining them because I don't like the low buy and no buy approach. Now, I know, I'm a little late to discussing this topic. We're more than halfway through February, but it's been weighing heavily on my mind, so here we go. And before we get into why I don't like low buy and no buy and what I do instead, let me first make a very big disclaimer that this video is not meant to discourage anyone from doing low buy or no buy. If you are currently doing one or you're seriously considering doing it, whether for a full year or just a couple months, I'm here to cheer you on in that endeavor. I think it is a fantastic thing to do, especially if you need to tackle serious consumer debt or a genuine shopping addiction. It's clearly a system that works for many people, and I'm not here to discredit that. What this video is meant to be is just another perspective on this topic from someone who's tried a low buy year previously and found it to be pretty unhelpful, especially as a person who is already very frugal and does not need drastic measures to reduce unnecessary spending. There are certain aspects of low buy and no buy that just don't fit with who I am, with how my mind works, or with the season of life that I'm currently in. So I'm just sharing my experience with this type of challenge on the off chance that even one person can relate. Just shouting into the void. But if you're new here, hello, my name is Melody. I make videos about creating a custom wardrobe, making costumes, and generally just being a crafty woman who also happens to be on a budget. And you can find me getting up to those same nefarious activities over on Instagram. So I did a low buy year in 2021 and I hated it. I kind of hated it. These are the rules I had for myself doing low buy this year, and I'm quite glad to be done with it. I didn't save a copy of my rules from that year, unfortunately, but from what I can remember, they were quite strict. I was only allowed 12 items of clothing, which included shoes and accessories, for the entire year. I was only allowed to replace makeup as I used it up, plus 1 extra item per quarter, 2 media items a month, like books, movies, or music, since my husband and I are working on creating kind of our own physical media library, and 100 years, I meant to say $100. I don't know why I said years. Total for the year toward crafting and sewing supplies. By August of that year, I was doing well in every category except for clothing, which I failed and went over the limit when I found myself unable to fit comfortably in most of my summer clothing. I really dislike most of my wardrobe right now, at least my summer things. I put something on and I just feel ugly in it, or it doesn't fit right, or it doesn't feel right. Even if it does fit, it just doesn't feel right. In retrospect, there were multiple factors working against me. First of all, we were still knee-deep in lockdowns and quarantining measures here, so life was pretty miserable in that regard. That summer, we also moved out of my first apartment, which I loved. I'd been living there with my husband for a year after we got married, and we decided to move into a set of conjoined bedrooms upstairs at my in-laws' house. And that was a terrible decision. I was deeply not okay. I had almost no social connections or community due to the lockdowns, and I now had very little space and very little privacy. These were not the best conditions to be adding super restrictive rules about what I could and could not buy on top of. My poor mental health from these circumstances then led to some weight gain, but I wasn't allowed to buy enough new clothes that actually fit. That wasn't something that I had anticipated or had made a backup plan for. I also made the poor decision to massively declutter my wardrobe at the same time, which of course I now know is not recommended, but back then I hadn't heard that advice yet. By decluttering on a large scale, not just a few items here and there, but piles of them, I was accidentally creating gaps in my wardrobe that I was then not allowed to fill. I unintentionally set myself up to fail. So knowing the context of why I failed my first low buy, knowing how to avoid some of those pitfalls, and considering that I was doing well in all other categories except for clothing, you might think, well, why not just give it another try? Maybe it was a case of the wrong place at the wrong time, and I could create different rules that would work better a second second time around. Maybe. But there are things about myself that my failed low buy taught me and that I've had time to reflect on over the last few years that make low buy and no buy not the best strategy for me. It just isn't a good fit for who I am and how I interact with money. I grew up poor, and that's not something that ever really leaves you. It has deeply affected the way that I interact with and feel about money, most notably in the pervasive scarcity mindset that I struggle with. Some people who've grown up poor tend to spend frivolously whenever they get the smallest bit of extra money, but I swung the complete opposite direction. I became extremely frugal. Everything had to be thrifted or secondhand. Anything I could DIY to save money, I would, even if that wasn't the best option. It has only been very recently that I've been able to spend money on myself without feeling guilty. Even in college, I was there on scholarships and loans, and I didn't make very much from my campus jobs to spend on extra things, nor did I have much time between extracurriculars and class to be shopping anyway. When I lived on my own for a few years, working full-time after college, I only brought home $2,000 a month, half of which went toward rent. And that other $1,000 had to go toward student loans and necessities. So there was almost nothing left over. So being frugal and spending mindfully has always been a part of who I am, both out of necessity and partially out of a natural temperament. It might seem then like low buy or no buy would be a perfect fit for someone like me, but I found that this approach and its extreme restrictive budgeting did not support my already existing frugal habits, but instead heightened my anxieties around money and my scarcity mindset. The limits on how many items I could purchase for the year or for the month didn't feel like helpful tools to increase my savings. They felt like a punishment. I would stress out over how many purchases I had left and fret over making sure each one was the most optimized purchase possible for fear of wasting a spot. And then I would feel guilty anyway when I did use up a purchase because surely I could have used it on something better. I would see that number of allowed purchases remaining get smaller and smaller and feel increasingly more stressed out about it. I was creating a false sense of scarcity for myself. It was a game I couldn't win. Additionally, as is the case for many people, making shopping somewhat forbidden meant it was on my mind more. This is not unique to shopping or clothes or even foods that we consider off limits. It's a simple case of psychological reactance. When you tell people they can't have something, they usually want it more. Now, this effect was not nearly as strong for me as the stress about my dwindling remaining purchases, but I didn't like the way shopping, or rather making sure that I wasn't shopping, was almost always on my mind. I didn't like that focusing on the absence of a behavior, shopping, took up so much space in my brain rather than replacing it with the presence of other healthier behaviors. And now I just feel like I'm back in my behavior modification class. Cessation of an unwanted behavior is often more difficult than the addition of a desired behavior, which is why it can be beneficial to do them in tandem. Replace the unwanted behavior with a more desirable one, which was hard to do in the middle of lockdowns, living in an environment that had my nervous system in constant fight or flight, and with my mental health basically in the crapper. I was in survival mode. This was not a time to be working on becoming my higher self. Now, ironically, creating a budget with a dollar amount limit on different categories per week or per month doesn't stress me out anywhere near as much as the item number limits or straight up banning of certain categories that low buy or no buy employ. I found that setting super restrictive and precise item number limits on my spending wasn't helpful to me because I was already spending so little. And those limits only triggered my anxieties around money and didn't actually target the behaviors I wanted to change. It was approaching the issue from the wrong angle. So let me tell you now what I do instead. For one, I'm not setting a number limit on how many items I'm allowed to buy. Again, I'm able to do this because I'm already quite frugal and mindful with my spending. We don't use food delivery apps or eat out very often. We drive old cars, we don't have credit card debt, and my student loans are paid off. What I want to focus on instead is cultivating behaviors and habits that will reduce excess spending in the first place. The first and biggest one for me is reducing how often I go to the thrift store. I love thrifting, but I really don't need to go right now. There's nothing that I need at the moment from the thrift store, so I don't need to make a trip there just to browse. I will be avoiding the thrift store unless there is something specific I am looking for, or if I'm going with a buddy, because I purchase a lot less when I thrift with someone else, and I do a better job at sticking to my thrift wish list. I just spend so much less time in the store when I'm with another person. But otherwise, I don't need to go. And the same thing applies for TJ Maxx or Home Goods or anywhere that I would just be shopping for the sake of shopping. It should not be treated like a recreational activity. I've also started hosting clothing swaps with my friends, and I'm working on branching them out to include a slightly wider group of women. These have been so much fun, both as a chance to shop for free and clear out my own closet, but also just to socialize and get together with friends and acquaintances. I have 2 whole videos I've made previously about this, so I won't dive too deeply into it, but I'd highly encourage you to research clothing swaps in your area if you live near a major city, or even hosting one yourself with your neighborhood group, with your church, or even your coworkers if you have a good rapport with them. It doesn't have to be an elaborate event, and there are so many ways to go about organizing it to suit your needs. So I would highly encourage anyone who's interested to look into that. This is also a good example of replacing the unwanted behavior of shopping with a more desirable activity. Next, delete the shopping apps. Seems obvious, but even secondhand shopping apps can be a trap and a source of shopping temptation. Even Poshmark and Depop, even ThredUp, not that I shop there much anymore anyway, but I still had the app, so I deleted it. If I really want to look for an item secondhand on these sites, I can access them all from a regular computer. It's a bit of extra work as compared to just scrolling on my phone, but it removes the temptation to mindlessly scroll and find items to buy that I didn't really need. This can also apply to Pinterest. While not inherently a shopping app, I sometimes find images of things that I really like on there, and next thing I know, I'm going down a rabbit hole looking for something similar on secondhand sites. Similarly, as many people will recommend, unfollow anyone who makes you feel like you need to shop, or at least temporarily mute or hide their account. These might not even be traditional influencers trying to sell you things that make you feel like this. It could be anyone whose life or style you want to emulate, so you then make purchases trying to do that. It could be a family member you're trying to keep up with. It could be me. Even though my goal is to encourage people to be thriftier and generally not buy things, like I want you to get creative with what you already have. If something about my content is making you feel like you need to buy unnecessary stuff, then stop watching. You can come back later when you're ready. I will still be here. But don't let parasocial feelings toward content creators hold you back from healthier spending habits. It's okay to unfollow and mute people's accounts. I will also be focusing more time and energy on making my own clothes, using up the stash of fabric that I have acquired over the years and tackling the never-ending pile of thrift flips and alterations. Again, replacing the unwanted behavior of shopping with a more positive and creative alternative. I have so many items on my clothing or accessories wish list that I can probably make using what I already have, and at the very least I can satisfy my need for novelty by modifying my existing wardrobe and making new, unique items myself. I do not intend to purchase any new sewing supplies other than what I need to complete the projects I'm actively working on, which shouldn't be a problem if I'm avoiding the thrift stores, since that is where I tend to overbuy cheap sewing supplies. The last tactic I'll be using this year specifically is tracking how many items are coming into and leaving my wardrobe each month in my notes app. I will be noting how many of those were purchased, either new or secondhand, how many were hand-me-downs, how many were thrift flips, and how many were self-sewn. The purpose of this is to encourage limiting my new clothing purchases, but approaching it in a completely different way than I've seen with low buy challenges. Rather than setting an upper limit, I'm challenging myself to purchase as few items a month as possible. Framing it this way doesn't feel like a punishment, but rather an opportunity. I'm not in trouble and I didn't fail if I decide one month to buy a handful of items. I already know ahead of time that there are some things in my wardrobe that I need to replace this year, but I can be proud of every month that I don't buy anything, as was the case in January. I bought 0 clothes, new or thrifted, but instead I made myself 5 items. I finished 5 thrift flips for items that were not previously in my wardrobe, and I acquired 5 free items through a clothing swap that I hosted. I also didn't spend any money on the items I sewed or altered because I already had sufficient supplies on hand to complete them. So for some people, they might still look at the total number of 15 items added and say that that's too much, but I'm looking at the fact that I added 15 items without spending a dime. I consider that a win. So you might hear all of these strategies I'm implementing and think, hey, that sounds pretty much like a low buy year, and maybe it is. Maybe the outcome will be more or less the same. The goals for both approaches are essentially to buy less and save more money, but the way it's approached, the angle of attack, is different. What I've seen of low buy and no buy thus far seems to focus on setting strict item limits and making things off limits first, and then adjusting behavior with the goal of staying within those limits, rather than making the changed behavior the goal in and of itself. I'm sure for some people it works, and changed shopping habits occur as a secondary result of staying within an item limit, but for me personally, I just got hung up on the numbers. Reducing your spending for a short term may save some money, but you don't want to go right back to the bad spending habits as soon as the challenge ends. Approaching it this way with habit changes in mind first removes the feeling that I'm bad for spending money, and instead frames it as a challenge and an opportunity to see how long I can go without buying this or that item. I am still allowed to go thrifting, I'm still allowed to eat fast food, I'm still allowed to buy an extra item of makeup or a new book, but wouldn't it be cool if I just didn't? Isn't there something better I can put that money toward? Can I go a month, 2 months, or 3 months without that thing? Maybe I break my streak, but each week, each month is a new chance to see how long I can go without these things and celebrate those little victories along the way. It's a challenge and an opportunity to push myself to do better with each week and each month. Rather than focusing on how much I'm allowed or not allowed to spend, how many items I'm allowed to have, I'm focusing on removing and avoiding the things that tempt me to spend in the first place, and redirecting that desire to shop or to have things by doing more creating. When I'm creating, I'm not shopping, and the outcome of that is always, without fail, 10 times more rewarding. So no, I don't hate low buy or no buy, and I do think it's great that so many people are interested in it and making an effort to take control of their spending this year. And this approach clearly works for a lot of people, but it just didn't work for me. And I'm not looking for advice on how I should try low buy again and do XYZ differently, because at this point I have no interest in trying it again. I have learned what I needed from it, decided it wasn't for me, and I'm finding other ways to reduce my spending and shopping that are better suited to my life and my needs. And isn't that the purpose of these challenges anyway? If they aren't helping you reach your goals, try something different. I'd love to know if you guys have any money-saving strategies that are not from low buy or no buy, anything unconventional or clever or weird that you've started doing and is working for you. And if you made it this far in the video, leave a lemon emoji down in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know that this is a bit different than what I typically talk about on this channel, even though I've discussed low buy before, but I just haven't been able to get it off my mind for the last few weeks. And thank you all so much for really showing up for that last video. To say I'm overwhelmed would be an understatement. I am incredibly grateful, but I also want to go hide under a rock, so thank you. Thank you guys, as always, for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to hang out again next time, make sure that you subscribe, and I'll see you when I see ya. Bye. The chickadees are out here screaming at me because I haven't refilled the bird feeder. Sorry, guys.
Hey, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button.
Ugh, get out of here.